Hi, welcome to the woods for the history and literature of ghosts with me, Dr Sneddon, and Dr Katherine Byrne of Ulster University. I'll hand over to Katherine.
Society has always been fascinated by ghosts. Ever since time began, we've told stories about the existence of things that we don't understand, and we've questioned those. And society has really been fascinated then with these ideas that ghosts represent things that we don't understand, things that we can only imagine, and they raise the great questions of human existence. Ghosts have always invited questions about human existence, about the boundary between life and death. It's always raised the big philosophical issues of what happens to us once we die. The ghost story as we know it really took off in the 19th century. Victorians were the first people to tell ghost stories in the kind of format that we're familiar with. As the Victorian society became increasingly modern and mechanical, they start harking back to the previous eras and to the things that don't seem to have the kind of concrete answers that the Victorians sought in everyday life. So all the great ghost stories that we know and still tell in different forms today originated in the 19th century. The height of the ghost story is probably the Edwardian period, but some of my favourite ghost stories are from the late Victorian era, and one of the best writers I recommend you have a look at is someone called Edith Nesbit, who you'll know perhaps as the author of The Railway Children. There's something fascinating about the way ghost stories have always been a form that was used by women writers. The fact that ghosts are marginal on the edges of society, overlooked, silenced, and yet often vengeful and angry and trying to seek retribution for the bad things that have happened to them in life is something that women writers, I think, explored. They saw parallels between what happens to ghosts in their stories and what happened to them in real life. Women writers use ghost stories then to articulate frustrations about the way in which society was treating them. And from Elizabeth Gaskell through Edith Nesbit and right up to the 20th century, this is a popular medium for women trying to express the rage that they internalised. Most contemporary ghost stories take the form of historical fictions, and they allow us to revisit the past and kind of think about the way the past is still with us in the present. The popular novel The House on Haunted Hill is one that has been adapted many times, and you'll be familiar with many of its versions on television. The idea of the creepy house haunted by malevolent spirits is one that fascinates us and has done from the 19th century to the present day. These houses are form locuses of ghostly attention and spiritual energy, and we are usually invited to watch from the outside as a group of unsuspecting people are spending the night in the haunted house, and they always pay the price. And what these ghost stories of recent years have in common still with 19th century ghost stories is that there's usually somebody who is wiser than the rest in the narrative, who knows and understands that something dark and sinister is at work. And then there's a skeptic, a rational person who is always saying, no, this is nonsense and we just need to find out what's really going on here. And this is a theme you can see running through most ghost fiction. And it's a particularly gendered theme because usually the person who's rational and sensible is the man. So going back to this idea that ghosts can sometimes be feminist articulations, there's always this constant questioning of who's right, who knows more, who can keep an open mind and look beyond the simple facts in front of us and question what actually is out there in the beyond. So women traditionally have always been thought of as the people who can access that different side of life, and even nowadays there is constant tension in these stories between those who accept what is simply in front of us and look for scientific facts and knowledge, and those who are actually more able to go, well, we don't have all the answers. Even today we don't have all the answers. The setting of most ghost stories in some kind of haunted house is particularly significant because the house should be a place of safety and security, a place where we feel most at rest and at home. The idea then of most ghost stories is that they subvert this idea and they make the house, instead of being a place of comfort and security, a place which reminds us that it's had a history before, that other people have found it a home. These narratives are at once familiar and unfamiliar then. They make somewhere where we belong strange and eerie and sinister. Ghost stories remain as popular today as they have always been. They are even now so mainstream that we have a series on BBC One at the moment called Ghosts, which is a comedy version of the haunted house narrative and makes ghosts a figure of fun. So I think when something is satirised in that way, it shows that it has really kind of entered popular consciousness, and maybe we don't always need to be afraid of ghosts. But here in the woods tonight, the presence and the sinisterness of the questions that we don't know the answers to is still around us. The possibility, really, that there might be something out there that we can't see, but that we might feel the hairs on the back of our neck respond to, is always with us, even though we cannot see it. I mentioned that ghost stories are often about gender and divisions between men and women, and they also often have a class dimension as well. Quite often, the stories set in big houses are also exploring the dark past that occurred in those houses. Quite often, stories about ghosts follow the narrative of a wronged housemaid or a marginalised member of society. So quite often, ghosts are ways in which we can give voices to those that tend to be forgotten by history, those who are looking revenge on the way life has treated them. A good ghost story should make the hairs stand up on the back of your neck. And we do get a certain pleasure and enjoyment from listening to stories about ghosts. Though it is important to remember also, of course, that ghost stories are sad and quite often an exploration of the heartache and grief of losing a loved one, the darkest and most disturbing part of human existence. I've been talking about fictional ghosts, and in particular concentrating on the English ghost story, which has been so popular around the world. But of course there are ghosts much closer to home, and I'm going to hand over now to my colleague from history, Dr Sneddon, who'll tell you some stories from the archives.
We have just had the literature of ghosts, but ghosts also have a social history. The way people saw ghosts, the way people interacted with them, changed over time. In the 16th and 17th centuries, ghosts were nice. People smelt ghosts rather than seen them. They heard them rather than seen them. And when they did see them, the ghosts weren't violent. They didn't bash into things. They didn't smash things. They didn't pinch people. They didn't bruise people. When people actually saw in this period this type of supernatural activity, they blamed it on demons or evil spirits in the house, not the ghosts of the departed souls of the dead. After 1800, ghosts change. Ghosts start to do these things. They start to smash up houses. It's at this point in time the word poltergeist comes into usage in English. What I'm going to talk about now is a few ghost stories from this period, from the 19th century and early 20th century. This period is often seen as a time of magical and occult revival, when ordinary people still believed in witches and ghosts, but the upper classes and the middle classes were engaging in psychical research, they were engaging in séances, they were consulting astrologers, they were practicing magic. Now I'm going to tell you 3 ghost stories. These are documented real stories that I've got from the archives and from newspapers. The first story I'm going to tell you happened in Cookstown in 1872 to the Allen family, who were a family of grocers. It all started with windows being smashed, with stones being thrown by unseen hands, by rattling sounds, by clothes being torn. The whole neighbourhood knew. Everybody was up in arms. They suspected it was the 20-year-old son who was a ne'er-do-well, that he had read about black arts in a book by Cornelius Agrippa from the 16th century, and this had unleashed literally hell into the house, or ghost activity, poltergeist activity. The next thing, the Allen family, for about a year of this, they contact the police. The police come and investigate to see if anybody has thrown the stones. They can't find anything. And then they get in ministers, they get in priests, they get everybody into the house to try and see what happens. Again, this is a cause célèbre. The whole of Cookstown is up in arms about this over the next 6 months. They have a public meeting, 1,000 people turn up to it. And during this meeting, a spiritualist medium gets up on the stage, and this is a person who contacts the dead professionally. And they said, I will cleanse this house. Whether they did it or not is open to question, but Mr. Allen did, the head of the house, did get in a medium to try and get rid of the ghost. To no avail. After about 18 months of this, a reporter from the Belfast Telegraph came to the Allen house and to interview them. He noticed that there had been a ripped curtain and a smashed lamp, and he wondered to himself whether this was actually ghostly activity or somebody had taken a pair of scissors to it. Mr. Allen was still convinced it was a ghost, and he still wanted to get to the bottom of it, and we never heard of the Cookstown ghost again after 1874. No story about ghosts or mediums would be complete without talking about spiritualism. Spiritualism, put really simply, believes that you can contact the dead, and the dead, when they're in the spirit plane, continue to develop and evolve. Now, spiritualism started in America in the 1840s, and by the 1860s, people were taking spirit photographs with their dead relatives. They were holding séances, and they were going to meetings. And spiritualist mediums as well were doing good business. This movement moved to Britain in the 1850s, and after the First World War, it really took off. Maybe there was some solace to be found in contacting dead relatives after the mechanised horror and bloodshed and loss of the First World War. Spiritualism first came to Belfast around 1900. It spread from there, and we've even got some images of people in the 1930s in Belfast taking spirit photographs, and you can see the ghosts in the background behind them. Frederick, Marquis of Dufferin and Ava, was holding séances in his Clandeboy estate in the 1870s, for example, and he was employing a Reverend Williams to actually do the séances for him. Reverend Williams was a professional medium. Our second ghostly story comes straight after the First World War in September 1919, again in County Tyrone, in Omagh this time. It happens to a Church of Ireland family who are living on a farm. And again, you're getting the whole poltergeist thing going on here. In the past, it would have been attributed to demons, but now it's poltergeists. So what you get is stone throwing, mysterious stone throwing. Stones are coming down the chimney and disappearing. A Protestant minister who comes to the house sees that happens. He also sees one of the windows of the kitchen smash. In the past, this would have been attributed to demonic activity. This would be called lithobolia, but now it's poltergeist activity in 1919. The family are so upset. The Protestant minister obviously can't do an exorcism for them, so they go to a Catholic priest who performs an exorcism. The house is clean of spirits for about 3 weeks, and then it starts again. All the earthenware is smashed in the house. Stones are coming down the chimney. Things are being ripped up. Bags of oats, clothes. Again, the skeptics say it's a wee boy from the town who is going up the roof and throwing stuff down. Others say it is definitely ghost activity. Again, like a lot of these cases, it stops suddenly and you never hear from the Omagh ghost again. Our final ghostly encounter happens in Belfast in the end of 1931 and the beginning of 1932. It happens in Trinity Street, Belfast, to a household that contains 3 families. Now, the 3 families are 2 young families and an elderly family. And what happens to these families could be taken out of a film or a ghost story. First, they hear banging on the wall. Then they see ghostly prints, handprints all up the wall. Then they hear scratching in the attic. Anybody seen The Exorcist, the film from 1973? Then they see a ghost with red eyes rising out of the floor just outside the kitchen window. And then ghostly footsteps and a ghost in the kitchen. This happens all through Christmas and early New Year on the 7th of January. Two of the families pack up and run away. They've had enough. Again, a bit like the Amityville Horror or the end of Poltergeist. They've had enough. They can't take it anymore and they'll leave the house to it. But what happens is the whole neighbourhood find out, and within 4 hours of them leaving, 3,000 people have gathered in this street in Belfast to see the ghost. Reporters are there, the police come, they get extra people in from barracks, from all around, because there's so many people there. And there's a reporter again from the Belfast Telegraph, and he's there, and he asks people, so what did the ghost look like? Some people say, it was a nun. Others said it had red eyes, like a banshee. Others say it was a well-dressed man. Even a headless ghost is said to have been seen. There was even a small boy, and he's reported to have a Shankill Road accent. So a strong accent, as I think they meant in the newspaper. And the wee boy, and I'll not do the accent because I'm Scottish, said, he's got no head. So the headless ghost was seen, but there's multiple narratives happening here, multiple stories, but what it's shown is hysteria and people being frightened. So what happens, they bring the police in, and the police are guarding the house, and the reporters ask the police, have you seen anything? The police say no, we haven't seen anything. But the two officers that are on doors will not say whether they believe in ghosts or not, which makes me think they do. So the reporter goes to the headquarters, right, in Belfast, and asks the higher-ups, so what's happening with this ghost? And they're more satirical, they're more stepped back from the events, and they say, well, we've got no fingerprints, we've not interviewed anybody, we don't know if they've got green or red eyes, and there is nobody reported to have came back. So there's scepticism among the police, there's scepticism among the reporters. But the people who experienced it are still frightened. And a week later, what happens is more people are coming to see it. There's carloads from the surrounding areas coming to see this ghost. Again, the police are out there trying to control a riot. After that, the ghost is never seen again. But what I did find in the newspapers was that a year later in Ballymena, people were dressing up as the Trinity Street Ghost for Halloween.
We hope you've enjoyed our stories about real and fictional ghosts, and we'd like to wish you from the woods in Bushmills a very happy Halloween.